The hospital smelled like metal and lemon, and I hated both. My mother's breaths were small, like someone counting down with a finger. She squeezed my wrist and said, "No more secrets after me, you hear?" I nodded, because nodding is easier than answering when your throat burns. "Promise me, Elena," she whispered. "Read the will exactly as I wrote it." I said, "I promise, Mom," even as my eyes ran to Noah. Noah stared at the floor, knuckles pressed white, avoiding our mother's eyes. He looked like a boy who lost his homework and found a cliff. Mom pulled me closer and murmured, "The truth will be our clean house." I wanted to kiss her forehead and say, "I'll keep us clean." Instead, I whispered, "Rest now, then we'll fix everything you were brave about." She smiled at something far away and let my name out like prayer. I didn't know yet how loud that promise would break inside me. The funeral was modest, as if grief had manners and wore black. Neighbors spoke softly, careful around our last name like it might shatter. I kept watching Noah greet people with that heroic nod he practiced. He hugged our aunt too long, then retreated to the coffee urn. The lawyer, Miss Kaplan, shook my hand with eyes that kept secrets. She said, "Tomorrow at 10, and her voice made time feel judicial. I smiled politely and felt a tremor slide down my spine. Mom would have hated the lilies. She loved wildflowers with stubborn stems. Someone pressed a sympathy card into my palm like a vow in paper. After the reception, I found Noah outside, staring past parked cars. He said, "I can't do this again, Len," and I pretended confusion. "Again what, Noah? Funerals? Or pretending nothing happened?" I asked too softly. He blinked, swallowed, and said, "Both," before the wind answered for him. That night, I found the safe key taped beneath Mom's sewing box. She always hid important things somewhere domestic, like trust stitched into seams. Inside the safe was the final will and 3 ink-stained drafts. I read them on the floor, knees cold, heart punching through paper. The clause had a cornered tone, as if shame wore a suit. It said, "Noah misused company funds 2 years ago to cover debts." Mom wanted the truth disclosed, restitution made, and a letter read publicly. She required the shares to be reallocated until repayment, then restored later. It was fair, but it would also ruin what Noah still was. I thought of him as a boy, hiding report cards under mattresses. I thought of Mom saying clean house, and my promise souring instantly. I took the final copy and slipped the clause pages into a drawer. I told the ceiling, "I'll protect him once, then set it right." Miss Kaplan's office smelled like old wood and better intentions. Noah sat beside me in a good shirt that didn't fit right. The will read like a map of what Mom loved and feared. Charities, a scholarship, jewelry for Aunt Rosa, and equal shares split evenly. I knew what was missing and felt it echo like an empty chair. Noah exhaled when he heard equal, a sound like a door opening. He squeezed my knee under the table, gratitude burning through my thin stockings. Miss Kaplan cleared her throat and asked if we had any questions. My mouth opened, then closed, a fish pretending it understands the shore. "No questions," I said, hearing my voice go calm and harmless. Noah laughed a little too brightly and said, "Nothing from me either." The folder snapped shut, a soft clap that still made me flinch. Outside, Noah hugged me hard and whispered, "Thank you," like I'd saved him. We walked to the parking lot like actors leaving the stage early. Noah leaned on the car door and said, "You look pale in there." I said, "Grief is heavy," and he nodded like it matched his weight. He touched my shoulder and said, "You always take care of me, Len." I wanted to ask, "Do you know what I just did for you?" Instead, I said, "We have to handle the employees with compassion and honesty." His jaw tensed at honesty, a muscle betraying him more than words. He said, "I've been clean for months. I swear, the cards are gone." I studied his face, wondering what he considered clean or what remained. He asked, "Did Mom say anything important at the end? Anything for me?" I felt the question scratch my throat like a thorn behind language. "She wanted us to be brave," I said, and he smiled crooked. He said, "Then we'll be brave," and the lie blinked between us. Jade showed up with soup and a stare that missed nothing. We weren't officially anything, but her hands always found the truth. She set the container down and said, "Executors get insomnia or ulcers first." I laughed because my stomach already felt like a locked metal box. She studied the documents pile on my couch, then looked back at me. "Len, that's the will, right?" she asked. Voice light, eyes deeply not. I said, "Just accounting," and my lie tasted like cold coins. She touched my wrist and said, "Don't drown for someone who stands watching." I said, "I promised my mother I'd keep us together somehow." Jade leaned back, exhaled, and said, "Together means someone tells the truth." I changed the subject to soup, weather, anything that didn't swim. She let me, but her silence took up space on the couch. When she left, I held the door frame like it might steady me. The first rumors reached me before the mail did. An employee texted, "Some vendors haven't been paid. Is there a transition plan?" My chest thudded, because the past doesn't stay past with accounts payable. I called Noah, and he answered breathless, like someone outrunning history. He said, "It's old invoices, not current. I've got it handled now." I said, "I need to see everything." And he said, "Tomorrow, I promise." Promises started stacking like chairs in a burning hall. At night, I heard Mom's voice inside the ticking of the clock. "Elena," she said in memory, "don't confuse quiet with clean." I woke with that sentence like a bruise I couldn't avoid. I thought about the letter she wanted read aloud to everyone. I pictured hands tightening, yes, but also air clearing, shoulders dropping. Then I pictured headlines, and my feet forgot how to move. The flashback hit me while folding one of Mom's cardigans. We were in her kitchen 2 months ago, dust climbing the tiles. She said, "I wrote everything down because I'm tired of juggling lies." I said, "You're strong enough to say it yourself," and she smiled sadly. She added 2 sugars to her tea and watched them dissolve stubbornly. "It has to come from you if I can't," she said. "Promise you'll read it exactly. No edits, no saving anybody's face." I hesitated, then nodded, because I thought promises could be revised later. She said, "Your brother isn't a villain. He's just hiding from himself." I asked, "Why not protect him?" And she touched my cheek gently. "Protecting isn't the same as hiding, Ellie," and her voice sharpened briefly. I remember how long that silence sat between us, breathing steadily. Now, folding the cardigan, I felt the silence return like judgment. The vendor called during lunch and talked like a man carrying crates. He said, "We need payment or a plan, or we cut supplies Friday." I said, "You'll get a plan today, even if I had none." Noah texted, "Stall him," and my heart clicked like a guilty lock. I drove to the company, our father's name still shining on glass. Inside, whispers curled around the hallways like smoke from old fires. Noah's office looked clean until you opened drawers and found paper grenades. He said, "I was handling it, I just needed time to fix perception." I asked, "Where's the line between perception and stealing from? Tomorrow." He said, "You're cruel today," and I said, "I'm tired of worrying." He leaned back, eyes watering, and said, "I'll sell the watch." Okay. I thought, watches won't cover a wound this size, but I nodded anyway. On the way out, Jade texted, I found something you need to see. Jade met me on the pier behind the old library. She wore a coat that made the wind look like it belonged. She handed me a sealed envelope with Mom's handwriting on it. A duplicate copy, Jade said. Miss Kaplan kept it for safety. I opened it with fingers that didn't feel attached to me. Inside was the clause, and a note in Mom's steady script. Elena, if you're reading this, it means I was brave in ink. It also means you must be brave with breath and time. My knees almost buckled, and Jade's arm curved behind me quietly. She whispered, "You're not alone." But the paper made me lonelier. I heard gulls and car horns, the sound of ordinary life continuing. I said, "I lied to everyone." And Jade said, "Then tell them." I held the note like it could still warm her chair. I called a family meeting in Mom's living room because courage needed witnesses. Aunt Rosa brought lemon cookies like a shield against whatever came next. Noah arrived late, smelling like cologne and coffee and a running clock. Miss Kaplan sat beside the window, hands folded like a patient metronome. I held up the envelope and said, "I need to amend something." Everyone's eyes sharpened, tiny knives laid on the table between us. I read Mom's note first, her words landing like rain on hot pavement. Noah's face changed in slow motion, denial unraveling into something feral. He said, "You manipulated this." And I said, "I omitted it, yes." I told them about the drafts, the drawer, the lie I sheltered. Aunt Rosa cried and said, "We raised you better than this hiding." Miss Kaplan said, "The court can be notified, but truth must precede it." Noah whispered, "You chose her wishes over my life," and I broke. Noah stood and pointed at the door like I was a burglar. He said, "You wanted me exposed? Maybe you've always wanted that." I said, "I wanted the truth to stop haunting every room we entered." He rubbed his temples and muttered, "You don't understand the nights I survived." I said, "I understand the employees who won't survive another unpaid Friday." Aunt Rosa sniffled and said, "Apologize to each other before the house splits." Miss Kaplan cleared her throat and asked if we wanted counsel present. I shook my head because this wasn't about law yet. Not really. I looked at Noah and said, "I'm giving the clause to court. If you confess with me, we direct the story before it devours us." He laughed, a dry sound, and said, "Director notes from the righteous one." Then his voice crumbled, soft as ashes, and he said, "I'm scared." I reached for his hand, and after a second, he let me. We crafted a plan at the kitchen table, coffee scars marking years. Miss Kaplan outlined steps like a bridge built under boiling water. Disclosure to stakeholders, restitution schedule, temporary reallocation of shares per clause. Noah would issue a statement, not spin, a true account with apology. He kept tapping the table, creating a small, anxious drumline. I said, "I'll stand with you during the address. No hedging, no theatrics." He asked, "Will they forgive me?" And I said, "That isn't owed to us." Jade arrived with a laptop and steady eyes, offering language without excuses. She cut phrases like weeds, leaving direct sentences that breathed honestly. I added a paragraph admitting my omission, how fear rewrote the page. Everyone stared at me, surprised I'd carry my own fault publicly. It felt right, like finally opening a window I'd nailed shut. Noah whispered, "Thank you," and this time it wasn't relief, it was respect. The day of the address, I woke before the sky decided anything. My hands shook like applause I didn't deserve. We stood in the warehouse where the company first learned to breathe. Employees gathered with folded arms and guarded eyes, careful not to hope. Noah stepped to the mic, looked at me, then looked at them. He said, "I took money to cover debts, and shame found me afterward. I am sorry, and I am paying it back, starting now." He explained the plan without embroidery, every sentence like a stone set down. Then I stepped forward and admitted my part, the will pages I hid. I said, I broke a promise to a woman who told the truth. I did it to protect my brother, and it nearly buried us. Silence stretched. Then someone exhaled, and a murmur traveled like cautious rain. A foreman nodded once, slow, and said, Then let's get to work. Afterward, headlines were kinder than I'd rehearsed in my nightmares. Some called it a reckoning, others called it overdue maintenance on a legacy. Vendors returned calls with careful words and updated terms. A few doors closed, but at least we knew which ones. Noah signed the restitution agreement with hands steady as newly planted trees. He sold the watch and the car and offered more if needed. I met with employees individually, letting them ask the hard questions first. Sometimes I cried in the parking lot after, where the truth echoed. Jade kept showing up with coffee and presents, patient as a tide. We started sleeping in the same bed, not because of rescue, but choice. At night, I'd hear Mom's voice again, quieter now, resting finally. She would say, Clean house, and I'd answer, We're sweeping every corner, Mom. And that answer was something like peace, not perfect, but reliably warm. I took the clause to the courthouse and filed it myself. Miss Kaplan watched me slide the papers across like a season changing. We walked out into the afternoon, and the air tasted ordinary again. I realized ordinary is what I'd been starving for, not victory. Noah met me on the steps, hair uncombed, eyes awake for once. He said, I hated you for a day. Then I hated myself more. I said, I'm sorry for choosing silence before truth. And he nodded. He asked, Do you think Mom would forgive me? Honest answer only. I said, She'd ask you to forgive yourself, then go mop the floor. He laughed, a real one this time, and said, She really would. We stood there like kids at a bus stop, waiting for our stop. The city moved around us, indifferent as always, kind in its way. I felt lighter, not clean yet, but finally facing the sink. I visited Mom's grave with fresh wildflowers, the stubborn kind she liked. The grass was damp and the sky looked clean enough to drink. I read her note again, thumb smoothing the bend in the paper. I said, I broke your promise, but I kept your wish the hard way. I told her about Noah's apology, the plan, the employees' quiet resilience. I told her about Jade's laugh in the morning, my breathing normal again. I confessed that I still wake scared, but it doesn't own me. I asked her if the dead can feel pride or relief, or both. A small wind moved the flowers, and I pretended it was an answer. On the walk back, my phone buzzed with a text from Noah. He wrote, First payment posted, coffee later, and I smiled without flinching. I looked up and said, We're keeping the house clean, Mom, door open. Then I went home, not to hide, but to live inside the truth.